Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Dom Giordano, and I'm too loud. I have to try to tone it down a little bit here. Thanks very much for coming out tonight. Welcome to the National Constitution Center. We've been backstage with Richard Dreyfuss, and it's my duty tonight to help try to direct Mr. Dreyfuss a little bit. You can imagine how that'll go. I'll have that on my resume someday. This is what we try to do at the New Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. More than anything. Of course, we talk about politics. Of course, we talk about anything that's happening out there, like the Schuylkill buckling on the way over here today. That seems to be cleared up. But mainly, we try to come together around the issues that we really care about. And this venue and this night is just exactly what we're trying to do. My job tonight will be to interact with Richard, to talk about the Dreyfuss Initiative, which is to get civics back in the school, American exceptionalism. But more importantly, you'll have a chance to ask questions. Richard Dreyfuss, if you heard the recent interview we did with him, definitely wants to hear what you want to know about this. He's also going to make some major announcements tonight, later on in our show. That's what this is, because we're streaming on the New Talk Radio 1210, and we'll podcast this. So feel free, we'll tell you when, to ask any question that you want around this. Someone will be stationed at a microphone. We'll direct you to that. You'll have a chance right over here to talk with Richard Dreyfuss. So without further ado, to introduce Richard Dreyfuss, it's my pleasure to welcome the man that runs all of our spoken word. Think of the KYW, think of the Sports Talk, and think of the New Talk Radio 1210. He is our Senior VP and Market Manager, Mark Rayfield.
Thanks, Dom. Good evening. Thanks for coming out on this hot night, and welcome to the National Constitution Center. A special thanks to our partners for tonight's event, PhotoBridge, ClaimStar, Mike Ferrara of Ferrara Law, Gutter Helmet, Live Help Now, Valley Forge National Park, Let Freedom Ring, New Hope Academy, New Penn Financial, I'm almost finished, Capital Gold, PPL Energy Plus, and Williamsburg Dental. Thank you. Richard Dreyfuss has achieved much during his award-winning career. Best known for such classics as Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, and Mr. Holland's Opus, the Dreyfuss Initiative may be his biggest achievement yet. Based on his belief that today's youth is ill-educated on the basics of civics, he created the initiative to teach the next generation about our system of government and how to participate in it. Some celebrities choose to stay on the sidelines. Richard Dreyfuss takes social issues head-on in order to make a difference. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming the winner of Best Oscar for my favorite Richard Dreyfuss movie, Mr. Richard Dreyfuss.
Richard Dreyfuss, everyone. Also tonight, in the spirit of what the Dreyfuss Initiative is all about, we have Richard's colleague with us, who's in the front row, and will come up now. Scott Faulkner is Executive Director of the Dreyfuss Initiative. Scott? And I might add, Scott, you proudly bill yourself as a Reagan Republican. All right, just so that we have all the players set here. Well, gentlemen, why don't we take a seat and begin? Richard, maybe you can talk a little bit about, was this a road to Damascus moment? I was talking to your wife about the Dreyfuss Initiative. It seems to go back to 2005 that you had the inkling of this, and suddenly Was it a role? Was it something you looked upon? What is it that triggered this?
The actual beginning of this was 2000, when the court stopped the election process. Yeah. And it seemed to me then that what they were doing was they were afraid of the chaos that might ensue, which is another way of saying they didn't trust Republican democracy. And all of my friends immediately targeted Bush as the enemy. And I said, no, we're the enemy. We're the ones who allowed this. We're the ones who have lost our outrage, our curiosity, our demand for answers, and our place within the system as the final arbiter of political power. And so it's really up to us to put a stop to it, to demand answers about it. And my friends were truly dead set on impeaching Bush or something. And at that time, I went to New York to do a show and then to London. Mm-hmm. And I was cast and then fired from the production, the London opening of The Producers.
Wait a minute, Richard Dreyfuss was fired? What was the, we have to stop there at that moment. What was the problem?
Well, Mel Brooks called me and asked me to do it, and I said, I don't know how to sing or dance, and he said, oh, who cares?
That's how Hollywood works, huh? Kind of like politics.
6 days before the first preview audience, I was fired because I couldn't sing or dance. So, but I had a very bad weekend. And by Sunday, I was okay, and that night, I was giving a speech to Democrats abroad, and I told them that they were going to hear that night that I wasn't doing the show, and they were very generous in saying, oh, terrible, terrible, terrible. And I said, but Nathan Lane is going to replace me. And they went, who cares, which I really appreciated. But I said, I'm going to stay anyway, because I had promised myself, and I'd always wanted to have 6 months in England. And I said that I was trolling for work, and I would lecture or write articles, and they said, about what? And I said, history or current affairs.
Right.
And to make a very long story short, I did exactly that. I lectured at the London School in Cambridge and Oxford, and when I was at Oxford, they asked me to offer to them a project that if they approved, I could become what they called a senior research advisory member. And I gave them a project which was the biography of the idea of democracy as told by Charles Dickens. Think of David Copperfield as democracy. A fragile birth, a dangerous childhood, dismissed, scorned, and held in contempt, a shocking victory, and carrying always within the seeds of his own destruction. And they said yes. And I was there for about 4 months. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I didn't want to do that broadcast. I wanted to do it for real because I was becoming more and more aware of the accelerated removal of civics from the public schools in America.
How were you becoming aware of that? We talk about that all the time in talk radio. A lot of the folks here tonight are teachers. You've met some of them, et cetera. They know about that. How did you become aware of it?
Well, first of all, St. Anthony's College, which was where I was housed, they're all foreign affairs students. And whether you were from Italy or Russia or Germany or wherever, all of the scholars said to me, why are you doing this in the US? Why don't you do it in Europe? We need it. And I thought you were doing it right and we were doing it wrong. and it turns out that everyone is doing it wrong. And so I began to pay attention. I was already a member of the Constitution Center board, and so it wasn't difficult to find out what was happening in public schools. But I didn't realize the rate that it was going. And then life happened. The First War ended. The Second War began. Neither of them were legal. Neither of them followed the law. And office holders were asking everyone to not even pay attention to the wars, just go about your business and act as if nothing was happening. And there was something awfully wrong-headed about that. And there was a wrong-headed sense of a lack of common sense. Common sense was anything but common, and we were overtaken by common senselessness. And it starts with the war on terror, which is actually saying a war on a flanking movement or a war on a stirrup. It tells you nothing except that terror is a tactic of war. That's what it is. And it doesn't explain who we're at war with or why. And if you're going to have a headline, you should at least have that headline reflect some common sense way of saying who we're at war with. And there was never a question of anyone saying there was no time to go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war, which is mandated in the Constitution.
So you felt a lot of the roots of this were citizenship wasn't being practiced, we weren't proactive, and that certainly students weren't getting any of that.
I knew that there was no gene ever to be discovered that gives Americans a leg up on running a Republican democracy, and that it was a learned thing. And if you got on an airplane where you heard the announcement, we're going to pick our pilot from business class today, you'd get off that plane. And if you heard the AMA say, we've decided not to vet doctors anymore, and our new phrase is, if you want to be a neurosurgeon, go ahead, be a neurosurgeon. You wouldn't let that guy touch you. And citizenship is more complex than either being a doctor or a pilot or an Indian chief. And no one seemed to care. There seemed to be an extraordinary ability to ignore the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is that we were raised to believe that we lived in a revolutionary doctrine, that the ruler and the ruled could be one thing, which was a complete departure from 13,000 years of history, and that it was a noble and extraordinary act. And if we were a European power, we would have been slaughtered to the last man for trying any such thing. And yet people completely ignored the fact that they were the final arbiters of political power, didn't mind not being taught a damn thing about how to be sovereign.
How to be good citizens, right, exactly. We are going to take some questions for Richard now that we've kind of set up a little bit of his thinking, where this came from. Gentleman right over there where the microphone is, you can line up with them. We'll take some questions momentarily here because we want to know what you're thinking about the Dreyfuss Initiative, civics in the schools, the Constitution, and some of the things that Richard Dreyfuss has laid out. Scott Faulkner, who's Richard's executive director. Scott, you came upon this. How did you meet with Richard, and how did you help to move the Dreyfuss Initiative to where it is now that we're going to hear some pretty major announcements tonight later on?
Well, I'm very active in historic preservation, and Richard is on a number of boards and advises many historic preservation groups. And so we met through the Journey Through Hallowed Ground, which, for some of you who may not know, is a partnership of historic sites from Gettysburg to Monticello, developing historic tourism, and I'm one of the trustees. So actually a year ago, we met at one of the annual meetings and started talking about the need for understanding history and the context of our history, and as Richard likes to say, not only who we are, but why we are. And so with that, we started dialoguing, and last fall I came on board as the executive director. My background, as Dom mentioned briefly, I was Reagan's director of personnel in 80, oversaw his transition in 80-81, was part of the White House staff, part of the White executive branch for all 8 years of Reagan. Then I was in the private sector, but then came back under Newt Gingrich to become the first chief administrative officer of the House of Representatives. And so has actually been part of two major conservative revolutions, seeing what they actually could do, but also how they both fell short. And so my interest in history is longstanding, and as I finished with my tour of duty in Congress, I was focusing deeper and deeper into historic preservation, and our paths crossed. But also to bring up, why do we have a civics crisis in America? When I was CAO of the House, I met with George White many times. He was the architect of the Capitol. And the two of us in the summer of '96 planned the National Capitol Visitor Center. And this is a little bit about crowd control. This is still years before 9/11 and security concerns. The main reason for the National Capitol Visitor Center were that the tour guides of the Capitol were tired of answering tourist questions about, no, the Oval Office is not here, and also trying to explain why there were two wings to the building. And so we started to realize that whether it was tourists from Virginia or Iowa or California, there was a fundamental misunderstanding of our federal government, our Republican democracy, the three branches of government, and something had to be done. So that was my first aha moment. So when Richard asked me to come on board to help ramp up the initiative and be kind of the implementer for his great vision, I hesitated maybe a nanosecond.
Well, Richard and I have a recent conversation. We know his political leanings in some areas, and you identified yourself with Newt Gingrich and Ronald Reagan. And that's the thrilling part of it, to have you two guys together, how we all share this. It doesn't matter across the political spectrum. And that due to your national celebrity, you're the first guy that's really gotten traction on this.
Yeah, it was astonishing to realize before I left for Oxford that there are actually about 50 civic missions in the country, all of whom recognize that we need to teach civics, and some of them had been around for 50 years and had no traction of any kind. No one had taken any notice of them.
Talk about that a little bit, Richard. You told me recently, people here have heard the interview, where you went to Congress. This should be a layup. You think everybody on both sides of the aisle, but you met all kinds of hurdles, except with John Boehner and a couple of other guys.
I had spoken, starting in 2005, to any audience I could get, mostly on the right, and I had never gotten one person to disagree that civics should be taught to the young, not university level, but the young, that you must first tie your kids with love and affection to your nation, and then teach them not just the phrase American exceptionalism, which is a catchphrase of the right, but prove it. We have done things in our past which have gifted mankind. We are truly a revolutionary state who has done more for mankind than any other nation in the history of the world. And we have been the good guys. We've also been the bad guys, but we've been the good guys. My father's generation, when they understood what Hitler meant, that he meant everything he said exactly as he wrote it, they stopped their whole world and went across to Europe and beat him to death. Because, as the French premier said on the run when the Blitzkrieg started, he gave an extraordinary speech on the radio. He said, we have made a terrible error. We thought we were in a geopolitical situation. This is not geopolitics. This is a religious war. This is Hitler wanting to bring the worship of Thor and Loki back. This is the belief in the flat earth. This is the belief in turtles holding up the earth all the way down into infinity. This is insanity. And that's why he described in 1940 how Slavs were being thrown onto the assembly line, worked to death, not fed, and when they died, thrown out. And he was bringing back the darkness. And America can be many things and has committed many sins and follies. But America, in its essence, is one of a handful of countries in history that has inherent meaning. And it means that it stands for the light of intelligence, the light of reason, the light of logic, the light of the Enlightenment era. And our founding documents are suffused with those values. And if you took a picture of the world, just to take a picture of the light and the dark, meaning intelligence versus stupidity, the world would be awash in darkness and blood and cruelty, except for the rarest of twinkles of light that were started here in Philadelphia. And as Aaron Sorkin wrote in The American President, America's hard. America takes work. And it does, because for the very first time in 13,000 years of governing, a theory was actualized that handed the common man final political power. Not the monarch, not the sovereign separate from his people, but the people themselves constituted as monarchy, as sovereignty. Did you know that every sovereign in history has been tutored? Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great. And every sovereign has had tutors because they always understood that sovereignty was complex. And that was when the people weren't even part of the narrative tale of that country. If a king wanted an irrigation system, he turned to his cousin and said, "Give me an irrigation system." And no one turned to the common man for anything. And when the founders wrote, "We, the people," they themselves did not understand what Pandora's box they were opening. It was not until Horace Mann, 50 years later, realizing that the common man had never, ever been trained. There was no precedent. That he said that public education had to be funded by the government and was for the explicit purpose of raising up good citizenship. 47% of the states have that in their constitutions. In my adult life, I have watched that disappear from American public schools at such an accelerating rate that right now I would venture to guess that maybe 3% of American schools have any kind of civic training, and that civic training bears no resemblance to any reality that we live in. Nothing. It's all fairy dust and theory. But no practical political power is taught, and I would say, whenever you hear me say the word civics, I know that civics is one of the 5 most boring words in history. Power, however, is not. And so what I'm trying to teach our young is the use in the real world of practical political power.
All right, Richard Dreyfuss with us. The Dreyfuss Initiative will continue with Dom Giordano from the National Constitution Center. More coming up next, and we'll take some of your questions from Mr. Dreyfuss. Welcome back to the National Constitution Center. Dom Giordano with you with Richard Dreyfuss, the Dreyfuss Initiative, and his Executive Director, Scott Faulkner. If you have a question for Mr. Dreyfuss, proceed right over to the microphone. We'll start to take some questions. And as I said, he has some major announcements tonight that kind of get into the traction that Richard Dreyfuss has gotten, because we all share love of country. We all understand the message. We talk about it a lot, the lack of citizenship training, if you will, in schools. Here's someone, though, who's actually has some progress to report on that, and he would really like to hear your questions or comments about what you've seen and where we are. Sir, if you just identify yourself and give us your question for Mr. Dreyfuss.
Good evening. My name is Keith Peacock, Hainesport, New Jersey. My question is, the curriculum in schools is written generally in New Jersey at the local school level and then passed on to the county level and then approved at the state level. How do you go about getting this, and do you have a curriculum written specifically for the civics courses and getting that implemented into the curriculum courses at the grade school level?
Thank you. I do have a curriculum. I don't know whether it's properly called a curriculum or a curricula, and I don't know whether it should be called a design of teaching. I leave that to others. But in asking people in education, what's the mandate of public education? There's been a 100% lack of ability to answer that question. What is the mandate of public education? And people, chancellors of universities, have been known to flee the room at that point because they don't know how to answer that question. They're not alone, because all of the institutions in our country have rolled over and gotten confused and don't know what their mandates are anymore. But the mandate of education is very simple. It's to make our kids smarter on Friday than they were on Monday. It's to make our kids intelligent.
I'd like to take out a billboard on that over the Schuylkill Expressway.
Pardon me?
I'd like to take a billboard out of what you just said over the Schuylkill Expressway. It seems to be lost.
We have a right, all people in any grouping of whatever kind have an unalienable right to know who they are and why they are who they are, so that the mandate of history in education is to not only teach the narrative tale of this country and how it came to be what it is, what it's meant to be, what are its goals and values, and where its values came from. For instance, in 13,000 years of human history, with monarchy under divine right, with theological dictatorship, with socialism and communism and dictatorships and fascism. What makes America so revolutionary? What makes it so exceptional? And when I ask that of kids, for the most part, their answer is independence from Great Britain. Well, that's not revolutionary. It's been done a lot of times in a lot of countries. What's really revolutionary here? And that is that we actualized and signed onto the notion that the ruler and the ruled could be one thing, and that the monarch was not a bloodline of one family or a caste system that you had to enter only through the battlefield or through some great crime that acquired a great fortune in the past, and that we lived under a curse for 13,000 years, and that curse is actually known by all of you before I say it. You and yours will never rise. You're a serf, and your grandchildren will be serfs, and my heel will always be on your neck. And that was the truth of the world until America said, wait 1 second. If you can manage to get here, if you can make the journey, if you can actually survive the journey, if you have luck and grit and talent and luck and discipline, you can rise. No guarantee, but you can rise in your lifetime by your own merit and brains. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the most important political message ever given to anyone in 13,000 years. And everyone in the world heard it. Everyone in the world heard it and knew it for what it was, which was a political miracle. For the first time, someone was saying to those who had nothing that they were invited to go as far as their intellect and creativity dared them to, and that they were allowed all the reward for their effort. And they came, that's why they come here now, that's why they'll always come here. And the only ones that don't know about the miracle of America is our own kids, because we don't teach it to them anymore. And this is not Richard Dreyfuss. This is Alexis de Tocqueville from 1835. If you don't teach every new generation of Americans the ideas of reason and logic and clarity of thought and critical analysis and debate and dissent and civility and context, if you don't teach that to a nation that is bound only by those ideas, we're not bound. We have no common ancestry. We have no common religion. We have nothing in the past that binds us together. We only have the future. And John Adams said, we value our progeny more than we value our ancestry. No country ever said that. And that's why we were admired and looked up to, and we deserved it. And it took guts to be an American. It took guts to learn about America, because there was no precedent for any such tip of the hat of respect toward mankind's potential than our Constitution. Nothing.
Another
had
question
ever
for Mr.
gifted
Dreyfuss.
mankind that
Yes,
well.
sir. Identify yourself.
My name is Jerry Grabinski. I'm with the West Jersey Tea Party, and I have a real-life situation to share with you, which would probably be multiplied by the 50 states. We have been trying since May of 2010 to get civics restructured in New Jersey to be taught as a stand-alone course. Presently, it's taught in the 4th, 8th, and 12th grades. Since that time, I'm not saying we're getting pushback, we aren't getting any champions within the New Jersey Education Department of Education. So my question to you is, how can you help us get civics taught as a standalone course?
Scott?
I think the first thing is we have seen the federal government bury the legacy of Horace Mann through No Child Left Behind. That obsession, which at the time seemed awfully like a good idea, was to basically turn all of our schools into trade schools, K through 12, to just get jobs and build workers. And so there's finally the pendulum is swinging back. And Common Core, which is a movement which has now been adopted by 46 states, is to try to bring civics back to center stage, among other things. And so we are working and in discussions with them to bring that back, to swing the pendulum. But the problem is, because of a nationalization of our school systems through No Child Left Behind, every school is now mandated to teach to the test, and that test is math and science and things that deal with getting people jobs, and citizenship and civics have been given short shrift. And thankfully, the pendulum's starting to swing back, and Richard is leading that way.
Here's one basic thing that I had to go through during the course of the last 10 years. Each time I rested on any assumption, I knew that assumption to be incorrect sooner or later. And I had to go all the way back and redefine all of my assumptions about all of these things, such as what is a conservative, what is a liberal, what is a Democrat, what is a Republican, what is a two-party system, and why. And one thing that we have to recognize is our present-day addictions. We are not only addicted to the trend of being addicted, we are addicted for real to certain things that have never existed before, such as instant gratification. One thing you know about America, or should know, is that it's tough and it takes hard work. And politics is not glory victory after glory victory. It's hard, slogging, boring work that takes enormously long, hard effort. And the fact that you haven't achieved what you'd like to achieve in the length of time you've given it, I would just say, give it more time and double your effort. But you have the right to continue your effort, and you have the ability to persuade those people who are in elective office or who support elective office to come around to your point of view. And you must learn patience, and you must learn a willingness and rigor to commit to this nation, however long it takes, to get it right. If you're not satisfied after a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years and you say, well, this doesn't work, it doesn't work like that. It took us a long time to come to the realization that there was something better than being a British citizen. As a matter of fact, we were the perfect British citizen, which is why we were offended by the British behavior, because we were their perfect children. And how could they deny us representation, and how could they quarter their soldiers in our houses without our consent? It took us a long time to realize that we thought of ourselves as the perfect, dreamlike British citizen, and to build up the willingness politically to fight them intellectually, because it was a long time in coming, the idea of actually separating ourselves from Britain. And we are beset by computer technology and broadcast technology that, whatever else it might appear to do magically and excitingly, it not only removes time from decision making so that you no longer ruminate and contemplate and have enough time to think things through and change your mind perhaps, you are the victim of our technology, which insists on your answer right away, so that you're constantly in a state of anxiety and stress because you're not answering the question right away. And when the towers fell and we watched someone kill 3,000 Americans right in front of us. We wanted to know, or television insisted that we know, who did it and why and where and how. They didn't ask why. They knew why. They hate us because of our freedom. Stupid. They said, we know who it was, we know what to do, we know where to go, we know this and this, and they didn't know anything. And they didn't say, let's find out who did this. Let's take the time to find out and aim our rifles correctly. One of the great lines I've ever learned was from Ulysses S. Grant, who said, always make sure you're aiming your rifle at the right enemy on the right battlefield. And we make that error all the time. So when this terrible thing happened, we had this reflexive demand for a response when we knew nothing. We didn't know anything at all about Al-Qaeda. We knew nothing at all about the Middle East or the problems of the Arab world or Islam. But we responded. And let me tell you, when I say to you glibly, we have removed time from decision making, I assure you that what I am saying to you is not only true, but is one of the most dangerous places to be in your mind. You might afford the lack of time in fashion, in sports, but you can't afford in geopolitics to have time removed from the ability to think clearly. In the old days, when King Philip of Spain insulted Elizabeth of England, it took her 3 weeks to find out about it. And it took her all the time in the world to craft her reply. And that lag time saved the human race, because we have always had this odd desire to kill as many Homo sapiens as we can get our hands on. But our technology has always lagged behind our desire. And now it doesn't. Now we have the technology to kill as many human beings as we want. And we have developed no spiritual restraint from doing that. So not only can we end up doing it by mistake, we can do it purposefully and not admit to being neurotic and crazy in so doing. I want to remind you of something. For 100 years after the Civil War, it was perfectly okay for any one of you to pull over to the side of the road and hang any black man, woman, or child that they wanted to. And they did that at a rate of 90 a month for 100 years. And any time we tried to stop lynching, as if we needed an extra bill to stop lynching, it was always defeated by coalitions of Western and Northern senators who thought that was the price of doing business in Washington. And then 100 years later, there was a 5-year civil rights struggle on television. And all of a sudden we all said, oh my God, what was that lynching thing? That was insane. We had been hypnotized for 100 years. We looked a sin in the face and pretended it didn't exist. There is no end to the capability that humans have in denial, in committing atrocities, and blaming others. We have to be very, very careful, because we have developed our technologies to the point that with one press of a button, we can end this planet's life. And think about it. Can you rely on the spiritual resilience of your children and you not to make the mistake? I can't, which is why I want as much support intellectually behind this system of governance as possible.
Okay, can we take another question from Mr. Dreyfuss, sir? Go right ahead.
My name is Gene Haig. I'm from Haddonfield, New Jersey. You've certainly taken a monumental task, Mr. Dreyfuss, and we thank you for that. We're right behind you. My question for you, what precisely is your definition of civics?
Good question. Civics is the comprehension of this particular Republican democracy and its place within other governance theories and its place in the history of mankind, and the excellence that we must attain to maintain this particular representative democracy. It is the tools of excellence that go into maintaining and comprehending our system, a task which had never needed to be done before because kings were the only ones that counted and fascists didn't ask. That's civics.
We'll have more coming up from the National Constitution Center. Dom Giordano with Richard Dreyfuss and the Dreyfuss Initiative. And coming up, we have a couple of special announcements from Richard and from Scott Faulkner, as Executive Director, about some of the progress they've made. We need to hear the good stuff versus the difficulty. That's straight ahead on the New Talk Radio 1210, WPHD. Very special evening on the New Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Dom Giordano with Richard Dreyfuss and his Executive Director of the Dreyfuss Initiative, Scott Faulkner. We're taking questions from the audience. And one of the things, Scott Faulkner, that we heard from a gentleman here is the problems he has in New Jersey. You'd think people would be out there championing this, but there are some things that we're going to let Richard talk about. Talk about some of the areas that you guys have been working in to try to, this is a multi-layered approach. It's not just putting civics in the schools. What are some of the broad areas? Then we'll let Richard make the announcements.
Well, the key is that when you think about what makes a viable culture, a civic culture here in America or any country, it's an interweaving of many different threads. It is the K through 12 pipeline, how you prepare young people to take their place as engaged, effective citizens. The second is how do you engage the popular culture? How do you have people learn about our country in many different ways, especially through the arts? And how do you give people a sense of grounding, a sense of place in terms of preservation of history, but a sense of place in terms of where we fit in history and how one thing leads to another, And those are the three initiatives we're going to be announcing tonight, which I'll let Richard do. But basically, we're looking at, for the last really 6-7 years, Richard has been the Paul Revere. Not the Sarah Palin Paul Revere, but the Paul Revere that is out there actually raising the clarion call that there's something grievously wrong with this country. And that is that we've forgotten the rules of the game. We've lost a common frame of reference. And we've lost a basic civility in the way we talk to other people who we might disagree with. And this is something that has unraveled over many decades. There are many sins of omission, many sins of commission, and enough blame to be spread across the entire political spectrum. So now we're trying to say, how do we bring us back from the brink? And so reweaving that civic culture is going to be many years in the making and many activities in the making and many partnerships in the making. And so tonight we're going to be announcing 3 steps in that direction. And with that, I'll turn to Richard.
Among the 50 civic missions that I visited before I left for England, none of them had an alternate civic program of any detail. oftentimes you'd hear or read someone say, we must support teachers when they bring controversial subjects into the classroom. None of them answered the question, what will we do when that teacher is fired for doing that? And when I went to Oxford, I tried to have a basis of common sense, because there was, not just in politics, but in all of the worlds that I lived in, there was common senselessness. For instance, in any paper that you might read, at least once a week, sometimes every day, there's a list of the 10 most popular films. And always that list is based on a gross dollar figure, which makes that list meaningless because it doesn't factor in inflation, and it costs a quarter to see Gone with the Wind. And no journalist ever asked for the list that would make sense, which was how many tickets were sold. No one asked, so no one's ever done it. If someone gave that list, you'd see a very different list and a very different order of things, and you'd learn that Gone with the Wind was and will probably always remain the most popular film ever made. And that senselessness includes how many Britney Spears covers are on Vanity Fair or Esquire or People, and why. Or, when I came back from London once, the fact that everyone in America was talking about how Scott Peterson had killed his wife and unborn child based on circumstantial evidence and sent him to, and gave him the death penalty. That was the only thing that everyone was talking about while we were having 2 wars without Senate or House oversight committees and no declaration of war. And then there was a mortgage controversy, and we were being cheated out of mortgages and no one was held accountable. And then our banks began to foreclose on our homes illegally, and no one held them accountable. 8,000 people quit the Bank of America and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, sign these illegal statements and take your home. But no one ever laid a claim of breaking the law against the banks. And then we had a bailout, which Warren Buffett said was worse than 1929. We had a financial crisis that was worse than 1929, and we gave the ones who caused it billions of dollars and said thank you. And no one said anything. And it was as if people were calibrating just how stupid we were becoming, and they would then take another step. And I happen to love America. I happen to love America in a way that I can hardly convey to you, because we are exactly what I said, a political miracle. And every family in this room, except for the people that we dragged here against their will, or who we found here and killed, every family in America shares what I call a cultural mythology. Somewhere in your family is someone who left or fled a caste or class system designed by wealth that paralyzed them and made them immobile and made them absolutely impossible to rise above the establishment wall. And then they heard about America and came here. And a year and a half ago, the Supreme Court of the United States said that corporations who were already human beings in legal code, but who happen, just by circumstance, not to breathe, live, give birth, suffer, or die, but they were humans, so they couldn't be sued for something. Corporations were completely unlimited. No prohibitions of any kind to any corporation in giving money to political campaigns. And they made no distinction whether those corporations were American or foreign. And if they were foreign, you couldn't trace them and you couldn't audit them, which meant that we were putting ourselves on eBay every 4 years. And we think that $4 billion campaigns are a controversy, and there'll be $50 billion campaigns within 3 years. And we will never know who is buying us. And human beings, for whom theories of governance are designed for, were strictly limited in how much they could give to about $1,200 or $1,400 a year to any particular campaign, which meant that our involvement in our own political system had been reduced to a ritual dance. And we were being openly traded back and forth between Mercedes, OPEC, Nissan, and other corporations. Now, this is not only senseless, this is self-destructive and suicidal. And yet, I can see on the faces of the people in this room a lack of dread. I wrote an op-ed once that said, I don't know why I can't make you feel the dread I feel when I think of the future of the country in 50 years. My grandchildren will not have anything like the blessings of liberty that this country birthed and gave to the world. Not even a little bit.
Richard, I would tell you, if you don't see it on the faces, I hear it on the phone lines every day, exactly what you're talking about. People here are sensitive to this. They're exactly in lockstep with what you're talking about, without a doubt. That's one of the things we talk about. That's why we're so thrilled with what you're doing as far as actually not just talking about this, but doing something. What's happening? Can you tell us some of the announcements that you have tonight?
First of all, I developed a series of exercises of the mind to develop intellectual excellence and to go for clarity of thought, reason, logic, clarity of thought. And then, as the human brain is developed and as we become emotionally mature enough, for critical analysis, which simply means honesty in the tale of the narrative tale of your country. What crimes have we committed? Cop to it and move on. We have a tendency to say in America, either America never sins, and anyone who ever says we do sin is a traitor, or America only sins, and anyone who says that America doesn't do anything but sin is an idiot. Both groups need therapy. So this problem is one of the problems that rises above partisanship. It damages and inflicts fatal wounds on all of us. And we have to rise above toxic partisanship to solve it. Or to put it another way, it is too important a problem to leave to partisan solutions because people have allowed their local political biases to stand in the way of what they know this country needs. People say we pay too much in taxes. People say we pay too little. People can say a lot of things. Understand that sometimes you need to pay a lot and sometimes you don't need to pay so much. But if you don't pay enough to make sure that the infrastructure of your country is working, you're not paying enough. or it's not working correctly, or we're not distributing the money correctly. Scott is a guy who happens to believe that the General Accounting Office is the sexiest office in the federal government, and if anyone actually read the reports they called for, we could have a perfect government. Now, I know that I watched policemen and firemen who were heroes and died in the towers falling. When they asked for raises 6 months later, they were called traitors. When teachers who spend 9.5 hours a day trying to instill some knowledge and values into the minds of our young, they are told that they are lazy and worthless, and they just want to grab our money, and as if they're some vacationing tourists or something. Teachers are the ones we all remember. Everyone in this room remembers the good teachers, because they were the ones who opened your mind, enlarged your heart, and made you better. And yet we allow ourselves to be distracted into letting them be victimized, letting them be pointed at as if they were our enemy. And your silence, until that applause, your silence is not helpful. What we need is that everyone get together and say, I may disagree with you about this and this and this, but on this issue, excellence in teaching, excellence in education, and making our kids smarter, I'm with you. And we're all together.
Richard, have the major California teachers, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, has anybody endorsed civics specifically through you?
I have the endorsement of Rotary, of the National Association of Secondary School Principals and Superintendents. I have the endorsement of the Girl Scouts. I have the endorsement of oodles of people in oodles of areas of our lives. Which is why when I came to Washington to get them to sign one statement, which was, I'm for the teaching of civics as a nonpartisan issue, I was astounded when I got a no right down the line from the right to the left, no matter who I talked to, the Heritage Foundation, the Huffington Post. Everyone said no, except two guys who were known as deeply conservative, Darrell Issa of California and John Boehner, the Speaker of the House. And those were the only two people who said yes. And I know that we're all thinking right now, John Boehner, Darrell Issa, those insane people. Well, they're not so insane if they're saying to me, Richard, we're for what you said, and we'll sign it. And they've learned a lesson, which is that there are some things that rise above partisanship. But if we got civics taught in every school in the country, and that's what we got, would it solve our problems? No. Would it make the automobile companies not turn your schedule of payments over to their collective agencies, wake you up at 5:30 in the morning and humiliate you and demand that you pay on time even though you paid on time? Would they make caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, become again the normal course of business in America? Business schools in America used to teach three things: profit, excellence of product, and protection of the workforce. NAFTA took care of protection of the workforce. We continued to build shoddy automobiles and anything of steel, and we allowed profit to remain as the only value. Profit is what allows political debate to go on television. Now, profit is allowed to be the evaluator for including people in the public discourse. What difference is that from when we say we left Great Britain because there was an establishment wall of caste and class designed by wealth that kept us out? What difference is there, really? Or did we just get our history wrong and George Washington actually lost the War of Independence and turned his sword over to Lord Cornwallis?
Another question for Mr. Dreyfuss. Sir, go right ahead.
Thank you. The prior question dealt with a definition of civics. I would like to follow it up with a question of primary cause. First, I should have said, my name is Ken Moskowitz, and I'm from Conshohocken. And the question is, you had both Scott and Richard talked in your introduction of Republican democracy. But also in your introduction, Mr. Dreyfuss, you referred to and praised power to the people. There's a distinct difference in those two concepts.
I've never used that phrase.
You didn't. It's what I heard in what you were talking regarding a praise of the power being given to the people.
Have as final political arbiters, yes.
Yeah. So if the difference between a democracy and a Republican democratic form of government, if address that issue.
Anyone know about this Charlie Reese column that's going around the internet right now? There's a column by a guy from Orlando, Florida, a journalist, who says politicians are the only ones who create an issue and oppose it. I am not making the error of saying we are a democracy. We are a Republican democracy, a representative democracy. That's what I say. A democracy, pure, means that the people in its majority have the power. A representative democracy is based on trust, that we trust our representatives, we trust our judges, we trust the people, because as fine an idea as it is that people be the final arbiters of power, it's a good thing to give them some speed bumps and obstacles to force them to stop and think every once in a while and not let the majority in its hysteria simply spill the blood of various minorities. So we have a republic, a Republican democracy that is based on trust. And when we pass term limits or we tell judges that we cannot allow them to sentence criminals because they don't sentence them harshly enough, we are saying that we don't trust them. In other words, if you enter public service, you're a criminal and a loser. If you enter public service as a politician, you are immediately defined by that definition as a criminal or a criminal in the making. You don't build trust by doing that. I'm against term limits, and I'm against anyone telling judges they can't sentence criminals. That's what they're there for. You can't deny their life experience that easily. But Alexander Hamilton made a very important speech at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. He described a country that he wanted, which was based upon the British because of its corruption, which was based upon the House of Lords because it had life terms and they could be hereditary or kings. And he described the exact monster under our bed. And George Mason of Virginia turned to him and said, "Sir, what about the people?" And he said, "The people, sir, is a great beast." So we've always had this argument whether we can trust you or trust our representatives enough. I'll tell you one thing. If you don't exemplify reason, it doesn't exist. If you don't educate people to what representative democracy is, it doesn't exist. If you don't tell them how freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion can be expressed, it doesn't exist. And when you load up the game and say, you don't have to be taught anything, our side has all the power, you are simply replicating what we fled in Europe.
Scott Faulkner, let me ask you for a second. Scott, how does the Dreyfuss Initiative deal with controversy? Does it see controversy, as I do, as a way to engage kids? I think schools sometimes back away from this way too much. There are outstanding issues, and we become politically correct, and we make everything mush. Does it engage those type of issues, or do you have to try to stay away from that in order to get any traction with getting this into schools?
The key is that we should be passionate about what we are passionate about. We should, but also the whole underpinnings of a civic culture, especially ours, is to be able to give public space to those we disagree with. And that means that civility is not about being wussy. It is not about avoiding conflict. It's about managing conflict in a positive way, in a productive way. I mean, some of the most destructive years of this democracy, this Republican democracy, has been the last 20, because you have such a partisan prism that has poisoned this country, where you have people who, on each side of the political spectrum, demonize the other side and do not look across the aisle and say, that's a good idea, I'll be for it. Or my party screwed up on something and I'm going to call them out on it.
I will take more questions for Scott Faulkner and Richard Dreyfuss, coming to you from the Constitution Center. Our final segment, as we discuss the Dreyfuss Initiative, we'll try to get on as many people as we can here at the New Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Welcome back, everyone, to the Dreyfuss Initiative here at the National Constitution Center. Dom Giordano with Richard Dreyfuss. And as we said early on, Richard has a few announcements that give us a sense that we are getting traction on this whole issue of getting civics back in the schools to American school kids. Richard, what are some of those announcements?
We're going to make some news right now. We have created an American history play competition among all the regional theaters of the United States. They will produce plays about American history, or the alternative what if of American history, or the possibilities of America's future. But they will introduce into the culture plays that are based upon known things or unknown things, of which there are gazillions. And at the end of every season, someone or someones will get a phone call and faint dead away, because they will be told that they have won a prize and they will win $300,000. And so far we have every single theater that we've called: the Guthrie, the Taper, the Ford Theater, the La Jolla, and the Globe, and we'll get all of them, because there's no downside for them. And this is a free market rules competition. If a play is smart enough, good enough, that the artistic director says it'll be in the season and it can make us money, it's automatically competitive. And then you do that for 10, 20 years. And you will raise up not only an awareness of history, but awareness of values that are called American, and you will find entertainment. and you will find values in our entertainment. The reason why our movies for the past 15 years have been about teenage angst as expressed through vampires, or about the science of movies like Avatar, which is just a self-congratulatory thing about, look at what I can do, is because art is always meant to reflect a society, and we don't know who we are anymore. So we have to find out who we are so that artists can then tell us. And some of them are going to get rich doing it. And that is called a trifecta. And the last bit of news is this. We are in discussion with a family, and they have come to an agreement. That family is more associated with this country than any other name in the country. They are associated with the birth and our values more than any other. And because there has never been such an institute or research tank as we are creating, I am proud to tell you that the Washington family, the direct descendant of George Washington's brother, has given us the property called the Happy Retreat, which is a series of buildings and public spaces in West Virginia, a spit away from Washington, D.C., right near Harper's Ferry, to establish the very first institute for the support of Enlightenment values and Republican democracy. And it will house and I am more proud of this than I can possibly tell you. There's never been support for Republican democracy, which is why what we really do is we wear the costume of Republican democracy at 4th of July picnics, and then when things get rough, we take off childish things and we put on authoritarianism, and we break every rule under God's law, and then we say sorry. No more. We will support Republican democracy intellectually. We will give bullet points to talk show hosts. We will
Wait a minute now. We don't need any bullet points. I got to tell you, this is all extra-rated. No bullet points coming our way. You have a script, we don't. There's no script in talk radio. I just want you to know that.
Here is...
You had no script tonight, by the way.
In advertising makes its rules by who screams the loudest. And reason can't be screamed. So there's been no defense of reason in the public airways. And we're going to give reason some glitter and some glitz. It may not be shouting and screaming, but it's going to be something you want to hear, because it's not going to be Fox News. It's not going to be nonsense pretending to be news. It's not going to treat you like children. You're not children, you're adults.
Could I ask you to throw MSNBC in with that, just for the record?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. We got that on the record. You hear that tomorrow. Okay, one more question from Mr. Dreyfuss. Go right ahead, sir.
Okay, hi. My name is Joe Doherty. I'm from Collingswood, New Jersey. Mr. Dreyfuss, I'd like to know what are some methods that are being used to evaluate the effectiveness of the Dreyfuss Initiative.
Well, when we find, we have a number of universities that want to be our partner in this, and they'll take a year listening to teachers and teaching teachers, and at the end of that first year, it will be put into practice in a number of school districts. And we will learn from that experience how effective we are. There are certain things, such as how do you prove good citizenship, that can't be proven when you graduate from high school. You can only know that 10 years later when you've seen how someone has been a citizen. So things will take time. and things have to be with a dollop of humility. I have to have a dollop of humility, which is hard. And we have to be willing to learn from our experience and mistakes. But we do know what our mandate is. We believe that intelligent is better than stupid. We believe that we should never, ever pass up and out and graduate kids who can't read or write or think.
Scott Faulkner, can I ask you, what are some of the outcomes, as you see it, and Richard started to touch on them on the Dreyfuss Initiative, that we'd have people realize they ought to vote? No matter if it's Tweedledee or Tweedledum, so-called, you vote. There's no doubt about that. What else would be the outcomes of this that you'd hope some kid inspired by this to be a good citizen?
Well, let's start with vote. In West Virginia, we just had a primary for a special gubernatorial election, 14% turnout across
Hey,
the
we're in Philadelphia. We can rival that on the low side.
Also, there was a great book that came out 10 years ago called Bowling Alone, and the statistics it quoted have been held up by by additional surveys. 3% of American citizens are engaged in their community. This is the people who turn out for sewer meetings and zoning meetings and school board meetings. 3%, that's terrible. So when you have a 14% voter turnout and a 3% turnout at a public hearing that deals with actual policies, you've got a real problem with this civic culture. And so where we're tracking with this is to look at how do we get young people engaged. Again, going back to the legacy of Horace Mann, how do we create an effective, engaged citizenry? How do we get young people to register to vote? How do we get them to turn out and vote? How do we get people to hold power accountable, to not only attend those hearings, but ask questions at those hearings? To read those GAO reports, to demand of their legislators, and especially as we come into the cycle coming up here in the 2012 elections, demand of candidates that they answer the question. And if they don't answer the question the first time, ask it again and again and again. Because that's what has allowed a lot of these people to get away with, in essence, a murder of our civic culture.
Final words tonight from Richard Dreyfuss on this gathering tonight and on the Dreyfuss Initiative and the news that you've made.
If you Google me, you'll find lots of pages that are anti-Richard. People say nasty things or truthful things. And what you won't find is anyone arguing the issue of teaching civics to the young. I don't like my feelings hurt any more than anyone does, but I'm willing because I love my country and it's worth it. And I'm never going to let anyone stick his hand into my family and take my daughter or my son and say, come along with me, little girl, little boy, let's go fight an illegal war and I'll give you an education or I'll give you a reward, when the education makes no sense and we don't know how to sew or cook or light a fire or know what due process is anyway. You don't know what due process is, so we change it to selective due process and you don't know the difference. I don't know the difference. I'm telling you, don't be distracted by the distraction industry. There is an industry in this country, and you know it's there because that's where the money, creativity, effort, and time is going to keep you from thinking about what you should be thinking about, which is that you are sovereign powers, and you have all the authority in this country in your hands. You must learn to wield that authority with power and confidence and grace, and continue the gift to mankind that this Constitution and its Bill of Rights has always been. Take it out of the hands of Rupert Murdoch, who has done his level best to destroy your freedoms, and bring it back. And bring it back to you. You have that right. You have it now. All you have to do is remind them of it and punish some guilty parties and applaud some heroes. Wouldn't you like to see some guilty parties go to jail? Wouldn't you like to see some bankers go to jail? And wouldn't you like to see some heroes applauded? We need these things because that's what society exists on. That's what we breathe in and out. And when incivility becomes the norm, when all we do is yell and scream at one another and interrupt, we have coarsened our political, our social, our spiritual lives. I don't know whether there's a God in heaven, but I know the difference between a good life and a bad one. And we cannot participate in the coarsening, the constant decay of our culture. We are in the third act of this nation's history. It will be gone by the end of the 21st century, and our grandchildren will mock us for ever thinking that it was anything different. And we will not be thanked by our children when life hits them and they are as unprepared as we are allowing them to be. And if anyone here would like to defend the status quo, would like to say, oh, these are not so difficult problems, and this does not, he's exaggerating, just raise your hand. Okay, you've just given yourself the perfect example. You all know what I'm talking about. You may not like me, you may not like my tone, but you agree with me. Now it's in your court. Do something about it. Do something. Give us money so we can continue doing it. Think on your own of how you can do it in your own communities. But get into this game. Get in. Don't stand like innocent bystanders. There's no such thing as an innocent bystander. You can be bystanding, but you're not innocent. So if you agree that this is a problem, you can solve it. There's no such thing as an insolvable political problem. Thank you.
Mr. Richard Dreyfuss, everyone, and Scott Faulkner here on the New Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Richard Dreyfuss.